Good afternoon from Ambon. Today, I'm going to think a little bit about Sago. On our drive to Naku, we made a stop in Mutong to see the beach and a plantation growing the Sago palm. This same tree had, without my quite realizing it, been quietly threading its way through many of my trips to Indonesia. Standing among the palms, watching their long fronds move in the heat, I found myself running back through every place Sago had shown up across these visits, starting with a very bad first impression on my first visit in 2015. Then later there was toasted version, a ceremonial meal, still bad. But in the third trip, in 2018, a Sago noodle dish in Ambon finally won me over. Now on this current visit, the plant itself growing seemingly wild and unbothered, has allowed me to appreciate Sago in all of its glory. Our introduction to Sago came in Timika on my second trip to Indonesia. It was not a good one. We were served papeda, the traditional gelatinous dish made from sago, the starch drawn from the pith of a jungle sago palm. It arrived white and glue-like, meant to be eaten with a spoon rather than with a knife and fork. And across eastern Indonesia, papeda plays the role that rice plays everywhere else. It's the staple a whole meal gets built around. Shelley and Rabbi Shoshana took one look and declined outright, so I took one for the team. It had, as far as I can tell, the consistency and taste of a very thick glue. I did not enjoy it even when trying it with the accompanying soup. I assumed wrongly that now I knew everything I needed to know about Sago. I was wrong, and it took the next trip to prove it. At a hotel in Jayapura, Sago turned up again, this time toasted, with the consistency of a thick, hard biscuit. It was nothing like the glue-textured papeda I remembered from Timika, though sadly, it kept that same unpleasant flavor. I was starting to understand that Sago wasn't one dish wearing different names. It was one starch, endlessly reshaped, and each place we visited seemed to have found its own answer as to what to do with it. A few days later, on that same third trip, papeda arrived again in Sentani, and this time it meant something. It came as part of a formal ritual meal of welcome. The meal consisted of sago and grilled fish from the lake, and it was served to the men and women separately. You can see my blog, Return of the King. The URL is in the notes to find more information about this meal. It was, by every account, an important ritual to the Sentani community. It wasn't invested with any particular Jewish symbolism, but instead, it was simply how guests are properly received. I ate that meal with a long wooden fork and was moved by the welcome behind it, and still, honestly, hated papeda. The fish, however, was very good. The real turn came a little later on that same third trip in Ambon, in a restaurant called Kole Kole. There, Sago appeared as something I didn't expect at all. Very thin, delicate noodles, remarkably close to Japanese shirataki noodles. These are translucent gelatinous noodles made from konjac, and they're prized in Japanese cooking. Ambon sago noodles arrived in a delicious, delicate soup, and for the first time, I enjoyed sago. In fact, I liked it well enough to go looking afterwards for a package of noodles to bring home to Japan. That same trip, the transformations kept coming, each one better than the last. In Saparua, another small island, a short ferry ride from Ambon, we were served sago baked and smothered in palm sugar. Piping hot, just having watched it be made in the traditional kitchen only minutes before. The starch, dried into a powder, is pressed into a wooden mold and divided into long, narrow channels. It's fired directly above the coals until it sets and browns. It was very delicious, sweet and warm, in a way that made the first Timika bowl feel like it belonged to an entirely different food. But it was on this current trip, though, that the story really came together. We ate at a Sago specialty restaurant, and we had Sago noodles again, but a different shape entirely. This time thick and white, closer to ramen than to the thin, delicate strands I remembered from kole kole. The noodles came with vegetables crowned with crunchy toasted noodles, the kind that was used in Chinese restaurants when I was a kid. All of it was served inside a crisp, fried flour bowl that you could eat along with everything else. This was accompanied by a light fish broth to be poured over the noodles. It was a delicious meal. The restaurant indeed had its own small display explaining how Sago noodles were made, which turned out to be a perfect preview for what came next. They sent us on an expedition out to a Sago farm the following morning. It was really more of a Sago jungle than a farm, dense and green and humid. There we watched the whole process happen in front of us, start to finish. A man planed open a felled Sago trunk by hand, exposing the pale fibrous pith inside. That pith was pounded with a tool made of shaped slats, perhaps from the Sago palm itself, mounted on a wooden handle. The resulting coarse fiber was then gathered into a woven sack and squeezed and filtered over a wooden trowel. There, the milky starch water pooled below, slowly settling into what was locally known as sago manta, the raw, wet starch itself. That wet starch would be pressed into wooden mold, very much like the one we watched in Saparua. And then it would be fired over an open hearth until it set. These biscuits would ultimately be ground into sago flour, utilized for papeda, the wafers, and even the delicious noodles that we enjoyed. As I watched its creation, I realized that this was a conclusion of a long journey. Sago tied together my many visits to Indonesia, making them a continuous education rather than a string of many separate meals. I realized that more than any single dish, this jungle palm was amazingly versatile, and not only as food, its wood gets used for seating, for walls, and for simple structures. Its leaves go into thatching roofs, into woven boxes and baskets, and remarkably, even into the ceremonial helmets worn by some of the dancers in Naku, which I explored in my previous vlog. A single tree not only provides food and shelter, but ceremony all at once. The sago palm wasn't the only thing growing along that road. Driving out towards Naku, we passed nutmeg drying by the side of the road. Nutmeg is one of the Maluku's most famous exports, and was the reason European powers spent centuries fighting over these islands in the first place. We even saw drying nutmeg flowers, which as far as I know, exist nowhere else but Indonesia, and are prized specially for baking. Here in Ambon, we have had a veritable feast of nutmeg. We enjoyed fresh nutmeg fruit, candied nutmeg fruit, nutmeg juice, and all three were absolutely delicious. The taste is completely different than the experience of the dried spice that most of us know from a kitchen shelf back home. Fresh nutmeg fruit is also an essential ingredient in rujak nitsapa, an Ambon specialty, and we watched it being made before enjoying it ourselves, overlooking a beautiful beach. Standing in that plantation in Rutang, I realized that Sago and Nutmeg had quietly been teaching me the same lesson twice over. Sago and Nutmeg, like so much else in Indonesia, only reveal what they are once you've seen them enough, in many different forms. It took me 7 different visits to begin to understand. I arrived on that second trip not liking Sago at all. Somewhere between that first bowl in Timika and this plantation in Rutang, my eyes were opened and I fell for it completely. I need, however, no convincing for Nutmeg, or indeed for my many friends and growing Indonesian family.